Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today about a particular research project that I am involved in, which is testing a virtual health platform for patients with type 1 diabetes. So this research project, which we've called TIME, which is Type 1 Diabetes Virtual Self-Management, Education and Support, has an aim to improve the lives of people with type 1 diabetes by helping them achieve better diabetes control in a more seamless, patient-friendly manner. And the digital platform that we're proposing will enable us to be able to provide, to fulfill this aim using a high-frequency, low-touch care model. And I'll explain that in a few minutes. So this research focuses, for those of you, just to remind you about diabetes, this research focuses on the 10% of the population of diabetes that have type 1 diabetes. As you see, 90% have type 2. This project is focused on type 1. So just to remind you, type 1 diabetes is, as opposed to type 2 diabetes, is more often diagnosed in childhood and early adulthood. It affects men and women equally. It is caused by an autoimmune destruction of the insulin-producing cells in the pancreas, and this leads people who have this condition to make little or no insulin, which leads to their blood sugar or glucose levels rising to dangerously high levels, and this exposure to high glucose can be life-threatening and over long term can lead to damage to multiple organs, including the eyes, kidneys, nerves, and heart. And therefore, to prevent these complications and to maintain health, individuals with type 1 diabetes need lifelong insulin treatment and monitoring of their glucose multiple times per day. So you can see they have to take the insulin via injection, and they have to prick their finger several times a day to check their sugar control to make sure they're getting enough insulin and not getting too much or too little. And so it is a very burdensome condition for people who have it. And so for this reason, our goal is to actually help make their lives easier, because there is no cure for this condition. So this is just a schematic to show you what the overall goals of type 1 diabetes management are. So the main goal is, as you can see on the bottom there, oops, sorry, let me go back. Okay. Is glucose control, and that's measured by something called the HbA1c. And so individuals on a daily basis are having to maintain as normal as possible glucose control so that they can control their symptoms and prevent long-term complications. But in order to achieve this, they have to continuously balance the amount of work that is required to maintain that normal glucose control, and I gave you a taste of what's involved with that based on the previous slide, as well as avoiding dangerous hypoglycemia or sugar going too low. Okay, so the closer they are to normal sugar, the more at risk they are for this. And so they're continuously balancing these two goals in order to achieve this ultimate goal. So that's another reason why we want to help them achieve that in a better way. So this is just an example of what it's like to live with type 1 diabetes. So multiple times per day, a person with type 1 diabetes has to check their blood sugar with a glucometer. They have to decide whether it's within normal, too low, or too high. And then before they give themselves insulin, they also have to look at what they're about to eat. They have to know whether they're eating carbohydrates, what type, how many grams, whether there's protein, what else is in the meal. And then there are a whole host of other things that also affect their blood sugar, as well as how much their response to insulin that they need to consider, and that go into this decision making of how much insulin they have to take, what type of insulin they have to take. And this is at least 3 to 5 times per day they have to do this, make these decisions. And you can see for women in particular, there's the added burden of not only all of these other things that they have to take into consideration, but we know that women have an extra challenge of managing diabetes with hormonal fluctuations that occur throughout the reproductive cycle. And unfortunately, blood sugar levels change quite substantially depending on what time of the month they are, and it's very unpredictable. And so this can really add to the burden that women have to face, and as well a feeling of lack of control over their condition, which is even more difficult when they can't predict what's going to happen. And so what do we currently offer for patients with type 1 diabetes? So all individuals in Canada with type 1 diabetes have to visit their diabetes specialist or endocrinologist every 3 to 6 months. They get a regular blood test, regular eye and foot exams, as well as other tests and visits as needed. But in addition to that, persons with diabetes need ongoing, regular, sustainable support from a highly specialized diabetes team. And that is for a whole host of reasons, and that can't just be provided in those 3 to 6 month visits. That has to be available to them when they need it. So they need help for technical support, for the devices and the products that they're using, troubleshooting when things go wrong, et cetera, et cetera. You can see a list there of all the types of challenges that individuals with type 1 diabetes face on a day-to-day basis and where they need ongoing support. And so how are we currently doing with providing that support for our patients? So the good news is that we do have newer technologies now that have really made type 1 diabetes self-management easier. So one thing, for example, we now have insulin infusion pumps, which allows people to have insulin be continuously infused through a pump. We also have these continuous glucose monitors that are testing the glucose levels 24 hours a day in the bloodstream, which it makes it easier for people to monitor their glucose without having to prick their fingers. But with these new devices also, inevitably there's increased complexity and a greater need for support. And so even with insulin pump users, we see that only 15% of our people on pumps in Ontario are actually achieving what we would call target glucose control. So we have a long way to go in terms of being able to adequately help and support our patients. Moreover, a very recent study showed that 50% of people with type 1 diabetes experience something called diabetes burnout at some point in their lives, meaning that it's just too much. And more importantly, I think there's evidence that females are more likely than males to experience diabetes distress or diabetes burnout. That's for several reasons, one being the biologic challenges that I talked about with regard to hormonal fluctuations, making it more difficult for them to have a sense of control over their diabetes. Secondly, women have the added burden of having to deal with diabetes if they decide to go through a pregnancy, which can really destabilize their control and also add that extra burden of knowing they also have an effect on their offspring's health with the control of their diabetes, and so on and so forth. There's also many other reasons. So just to illustrate to you sort of a quote of what it's like to live with diabetes. This is a quote from a woman with diabetes. So type 1 diabetes is a terminal disease. We work our butts off 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no breaks, no vacations, or else we die. We fight for our health every minute of every day. So you can see that it's a very burdensome condition. So how can we improve? So this is where what we're working on right now. We are currently in the process of developing a virtual health platform to help make it easier for people to access diabetes care more frequently and with less time and burden on their day-to-day life. And so we've already had some, we have a patient advisory group that we've already interviewed, consisting of both men and women with diabetes, and we're very lucky to have Dr. Shivani Goyal as leading the design phase of this virtual platform. And what the women have told us is that they want to be able to access their healthcare provider in real time when they need them, so more higher frequency care. Furthermore, they want to be able to save time. They will use something, an app, if it's going to save them time. They say they currently spend 2 to 4 hours a day on their diabetes. If we can save them time, then they will use it. So low touch, and this is just a list of the kind of things that we're looking at. And this is sort of what it's starting to look like. We're still in the design phase, but there are 3 components to this virtual platform. One is we're going to provide individuals with the opportunity to connect with their healthcare team in a virtual way through virtual visits, which will allow them to have more frequent visits, not have to displace themselves and come into clinic. We'll also have automated reminders, virtual booking and messaging, and then we're going to have a centralized repository of all the various educational resources and information that they require, as well as online workshops. So, sorry, I think I have to go. I'm missing a slide. Anyway, that's okay. So once we've developed this app, then we're going to test it in a randomized control trial. And so I will finish there to acknowledge my study team and thank you for your attention.